I'm Jack Hahn in Cincinnati, and appreciate Michael bringing the system, the ZERAMEX Ceramic Implant System. We had a good time with the system. It looks very nice. The implants went in beautifully. We had a very happy patient that's going to get two all-ceramic crowns in about 3 or 4 months. And so again, Michael, thanks for coming to Cincinnati and bringing your implant materials. Titanium, the ones I use, the Hahn implant, is more self-tapping, so I'm more used to that. This is something that was new. This goes back to the Replace, which I invented, which has a similar thread pattern. So you, most of the time, a lot of the time, you had to use a thread former. So that's what we learned with this system. You have to use the thread former, the tap. You have to drill to depth, following the manual. When you do that, it works perfectly. But again, I think the advantages are in the aesthetic zones. I think this has a good indication for single 1 and 2 implants in the aesthetic zone, from premolars to premolars, in the mandible and the maxilla. And again, the patients are sort of metal conscious these days. They get some different ideas from some of these holistic gurus, so they don't want any metal anywhere. And so this is an opportunity to not have to tell a story and talk the patient out of it, and you would have something to offer that patient that feels that way. Plus, let's say you didn't get the implant deep enough. In a titanium implant, the patient's probably going to show metal. In this case, there's a little bit forgiving because it's white and more tooth colored. And so I think, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's in the future of my practice. And I think it's going to be in the future of a lot of people that are actively placing implants. Yeah. And when you reach that, and if you haven't used the thread former, it locks. It really locks in there. So a learning curve for me, and I got to 50 Newton and I didn't get it totally seated because I didn't use the tap to depth, all the way to the depth. The manual says what depths to use. It's illustrated, and you just need to follow the manual. So once you do 1 or 2, it's pretty automatic, the things that you need to do because of the properties of the implant. But the fact that you can leave it above the bone level, the facial bone, is going to make it easier when you do the restorative aspect of it, I think. But there again, 1 or 2 is the learning curve. You have to do it. Those are experienced. Those are beginners. You need to take the course. And I don't think it requires more than a day's training and maybe hands-on with that. Well, I started back in the 70s, in 1974, we started doing synthedont, which is aluminum oxide. And they were very, very biocompatible. The problem is they broke. And when they broke, they were really hard to get out. So basically, a lot of those we just left as ridge maintainers. And because you had to use diamonds, that's the only thing. And we had to keep cutting X's and then taking chisels and breaking them loose. So that's in the days before zirconia. Zirconia is much stronger substance, it takes a lot. You can take a hammer, you can't break them. But there again, as I said, the synthedonts, the aluminum oxide, were very biocompatible. They just weren't biofunctional. And there's a funny story. I had a patient, I did her in 1975, and she came in last year. I introduced myself, and I didn't quite remember her because it's like almost 40 years ago. And I said, how can I help you? And she said, well, I'm here to check my implant. And I said, well, you don't have an implant. And she says, oh my gosh, Dr. Hahn, don't tell me you've gotten senile. And then all of a sudden I realized it was the only surviving aluminum oxide. And when they healed, they looked exactly like a tooth root. Yeah. So we laughed about it, and like I said, she's one of the few survivors with it. Nobel had one piece zirconia implant, which they were going to market through the Procera system. And I've been with Nobel before Clydewell since actually Steri-Oss since 1986, all the way to was it 2014. They wanted me to, I did a lot of the new clinical trials, so they gave me 6 zirconia ceramic implants, one piece. They looked like Nobel Directs in the same configuration. So they give me something new. I look at these as toys. I love it. I love to do new stuff. And I put them in within, I think, a week. And the chief engineer, Steve Herson, called me. And he said, send those zirconia implants back. Don't put them in. I said, you're too late. And they're gone. I put them in. And he said, well, Professor Schupak in Zurich, who's a good friend of mine, said that the surface wasn't bioactive, is what he used. But they were, and he just wasn't familiar with that because he was working with tellurite, developing the tellurite. And so all those implants did well. We didn't have any problems. My partner who restored one said he didn't know, he thought it was a tooth when he started preparing it. And I said, you just take a diamond and water and prepare it like a tooth, the abutment portion. And he said, wow, that's beautiful. Everything looked good. So I haven't had anything bad happen with using ceramic implants other than the early aluminum oxides. When I think of cement in abutments, I shake. It's a nightmare. It's always a race against you and cement always wins. And we know that you shouldn't have cement below the gum because it can lead to implant failure. In fact, when the engineers get back a failed implant, they look in a microscope. What do they find? Cement. So the fact that these screw in with the screws are made out of carbon fiber, which they make race cars out of. So when they crash, they don't all go to pieces. I think that's going to be more widely accepted, that you can do screw retain, the abutment screw retain, rather than having the cement in. And the fact you can take a store-bought implant or abutment and prep it and take an impression or scan it and get a ceramic crown. Yeah. I do all Broxers from Glidewell does everything I touch. Glidewell does all the laboratory work. And so we've been using for 5 years only zirconium, solid zirconia. I will not do any acrylic hybrids. I had a nightmare. In fact, I wrote an article. I lectured on acrylic versus zirconia on hybrids, and we've never had one break. And I assume this is going to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
was the first to have the concept. And how I came is I learn things that I do every day. And if you get your implant classes on, you'll notice that maybe in one day or 1 week you see similar cases come in, like schools of fish. Okay, so one day I had 4 single implants to do in the aesthetic zone on 4 different patients. And I was using the parallel walled Steri-Oss, which was a good implant, but it was parallel walled. And I found myself tilting the implant out because of the subnasal fossa, so I wouldn't perforate. So I wind up with having to use an abutment that has to change the angle quite a bit to get it in to look like a tooth aesthetically. So I'm going to bed, I'm thinking, I wake up at 1 in the morning, I dream implants, I run in the kitchen, my wife says, "What's the matter?" I said, "Nothing." And I drew the tapered, which became replace, on a notebook paper, and I felt so strong about this because the tooth that came out was tapered. So when I look at a parallel walled implant, why are we putting square pegs in a tapered hole? So therefore, I saw there was a lot of advantages. We could have a wider prosthetic table with a tapered implant, placing it in anatomically constricted areas between roots or narrower bone. And you know that bone in cross-section is triangular. It's a series of triangles if we cross-section the maxilla and the mandible. So therefore, we can bypass these undercuts and not perforate the labial plates, the lingual plates, and have the implant in a more favorable position for the prosthetics. That's the most important part. The minute I pick up that 2mm twist drill, I'm not thinking about the implant. I'm thinking prosthetically. What is this going to look like? How do I restore it? Do I create a nightmare for myself, or is it going to be easy? And that's the way I look at anything I develop. It comes out of what I do every day. And you know, you do enough of them. I've done over 40,000 implants in my lifetime. And I started when sex was safe and implants were dangerous. But anyhow, I emailed the folks at Tidewell last night, and I told them that Michael was coming here. We were going to put in 2 ceramic implants, and that I was excited because everybody knows how I like to play with new toys and to do new things. And that's exciting about implant dentistry. There's more advances in implant dentistry than any field in medicine. It's not publicized because it's not political, it's not cancer, it's not AIDS. So I like to be doing something next year that's new, that's different than we're doing this year. I mean, we have to stay with the tried things we've tried and had success with, but we learn from that. Success repeats itself and failure repeats itself if you keep doing the same thing in the same conditions and it didn't work, then that's a failure, unless you learn from it. Here's my experience, and that's why on titanium I stayed with the machine collar. I have 40 years experience with a machine collar. The first Steri-Oss had 4mm machine collar. Then in order to go to shorter implants, we had to shorten it to 2. And that's what became Replace Select. Okay, so on the Hahn implant, I kept the machine collar to 1mm, but we kept it. And I'm not saying that all this is bad as far as, but where we started seeing peri-implantitis is in poor quality bone in the posterior maxilla when we were dealing with implants that had a rough surface all the way up to the connection. And I called the engineer, and I don't want to mention the company, but I called him and I said, I'm concerned since I've switched to using the implants that were rough to the abutment, to the top, I'm start seeing more peri-implantitis, especially in the posterior maxilla, than I've ever seen. And he just said, go back to the machine collar. And that's what we did. So there's implants that have very aggressive threads, real aggressive threads. They come all the way to the top, all the way. So if you lose bone, bone remodels itself after at least 1 year under function. So if you lose a little bit of bone with a machine collar, you have safety before you get into the thread or the coating. With ones that are up to the top, you're going to collect bacteria there, and it starts going like a wick. So that's my thinking, but not saying that those implants are bad. Just know that what you're dealing with. So with the Hahn implant, we don't see it, and I think you won't see it with this implant. I don't have enough experience yet, but the fact that this neck of this implant looks like you would say a machine collar, let's say, of a titanium implant. And so again, you have safety if you do lose some bone before you get into the threads. The healing abutment is zirconium. So it's forming the tissue, the peri-implant soft tissue.
Management.
So when you go to make the final crown, you've got everything that's compatible. Let's say this is a Bruxer crown. And so this is a fixed abutment. So you can either do it direct, or I prefer to do a implant level transfer. I use closed tray because that's what I'm more adept at. So this is like a screwdriver that's in the kit, not this big. The connection is different. It's an internal connection with 4 lobes or notches. So the Replace had 3 in the internal connection, and here this has 4. So it's not like the standard conical connection, but it's a tight connection. And then you have the screw.
Carbon fiber.
Yeah, the screws, Michael says, are made out of carbon fiber, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you have the screwdriver. There you go. And then, so you can either do a direct impression or without the abutment, the implant level, and you got something all together. So again, I think this is going to be great for cosmetic implant dentistry. I think we're getting to that point where we have to think about, one of the things that I lecture on is the emergency implant. And if it wasn't for root canal, broken root canal teeth, I don't think I could be in business. So we like the endodontists, we appreciate their work. And so it's a big part of my practice. A lot of times we have a new patient that'll call in the morning and say, I broke a front tooth, and they may have seen our website or Facebook, whatever, and call the office and tell my treatment coordinator that they broke a tooth, they need to get something right away. And so we usually bring those patients in like at lunchtime, and we explain what we're going to do. We take the tooth out, prepare the site, place the implant, a temporary abutment, and they walk out with a provisional tooth out of occlusion, and they're very happy, and they tell everybody. So it's a good source of practice building in the future. And I think with this, you're going to be able to deliver easily, and you don't have to be the best cosmetic dentist in the world. I think just doing normal implant dentistry, you'll be able to deliver high quality aesthetics to that patient. So we call it the emergency implant lecture. It's a one-day, we talk about extracting the tooth, when you can do it, when you shouldn't do it. We talk socket grafting, delayed extraction replacements, and the whole thing there. So I think this will be another opportunity for teaching this to deliver to your patients.
Right?
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Michael.
Awesome to have come out here. Awesome to meet you, see you again. We met 10 years ago, but good to see you again. And thank you for letting me come up here.
Yeah.